Thanks for joining us here at Empowered Somatic Healing, where we simply adore anything and everything healing and somatic based. I stopped drinking caffeine about 6 months ago after finishing a 7-day water fast. And I want to pause here and say that I'm going to talk a little bit about my water fast, and it is not my recommendation that you do a water fast. If you choose to do a water fast, I would highly recommend that you connect with a medical provider around your water fast and have support, have connection, some form of a mentor around the emotional and somatic experience that you're going to have with that 7-day water fast. That 7-day water fast changed so much in me. It was such a sacred ceremony. And I'm still seeing the effects of that 7-day water fast and everything that it shifted inside of me and inside of my reality. Those details are still becoming clear to me as they integrate. And I know that they will integrate for quite some time still. And one of the things that happened for me as I came out of that 7-day water fast was the desire for a slower reality. And it became really clear to me that I was consuming caffeine as a way to keep up with the pace of my life. Meaning, I didn't want to change the pace of my life to match what I actually had capacity for. And so I was drinking a bunch of caffeine as a way to keep up with the pace of my life. And it was easier for me to drink the caffeine than it was for me to make major changes in my life towards a slower paced life. And coming out of the 7-day water fast, I made the decision to stop drinking caffeine. And since then, I've had a couple of sips of caffeine. And every time that I do, it feels horrible to me, absolutely horrible. And I had one of those experiences. My brother and sister-in-law had come over for Christmas and had brought some soda. And the next day, I had a little glass of soda with caffeine in it. And as I was moving through my morning, I recognized that I was reacting and responding in a way that was abnormal for me. I was a little agitated. I was a little activated. I was driving to the store and someone was driving in a way that didn't feel safe for me. And I got agitated. Whereas normally, I wouldn't think twice about it. And I recognized that there were all these little situations that had happened that day that I was agitated and activated in. The noise had been really noisy in my house. And normally, I would just create the space that I need to bring my nervous system back down and into a regulated, calm, grounded place. And then I would re-enter the space, holding that ground. But I couldn't do that. My house got noisy, and I got agitated. I couldn't come back down. And so later that day, I was sitting and really reflecting about what was happening for me because it was outside of my new norm. And I could see that and I could feel it. And then the reality of it really hit me. I have run an anxiety pattern of my nervous system for as long as I can possibly remember. And my nervous system was actually more comfortable in a state of activation than in a state of regulation. And I've worked really hard in the past couple of years to have my new baseline as regulation. And drinking the caffeine that morning did a couple of things. It put me into a state of activation that I had a hard time coming out of. And I want to explain this a little bit. With somebody who runs an anxiety pattern of their nervous system, they feel more comfortable in activation than they do in safety. And there's a lot of scientific reasons for that. But the very short version is that when we don't know that we're safe, and people who run an anxiety pattern of their nervous system actually don't know that they're safe. When we don't know that we're safe, we want to stay activated because we are looking for the danger. Subconsciously, our nervous system is looking for the danger to protect us from. It's a really beautiful built-in mechanism in our nervous system. But when you're stuck there, it's not beautiful. And so even though I was cognitively, cerebrally, consciously wanting more peace and ease in my life, my nervous system was more comfortable in activation because it didn't know that I was safe. And so when I looked back at my life, I was constantly drinking caffeine. I was constantly activated. I moved so fast through my life. Everywhere that I moved was with activation. And so when I was drinking all that caffeine and when I was in that activated state, I realized that caffeine was a tool that kept me activated, that kept me on, that kept me alive and safe because my nervous system wasn't actually comfortable in regulation and being safe. And so when I went through the water fast and made the decision to stop drinking caffeine, that was only because my nervous system was ready for more regulation, was ready for more safety, was ready for more peace and more ease in my life. And I've given up caffeine multiple times in my life. With every pregnancy, I would give up caffeine. Multiple times in my life, I have made the choice to stop drinking caffeine and then ultimately would go back at some point. And I wouldn't just go back a little bit. I would drink all the caffeine. So from whatever time I woke up in the morning until about noon, I would consume massive amounts of caffeine. And all I was really doing was trying to keep my nervous system activated. It was just one of the ways, right? And I want to be clear that there were lots and lots of ways that I would keep my nervous system activated because I didn't know that I was safe, and my nervous system thought that it was in danger, in life-threatening danger. And so I wanted to stay activated. When I had done enough healing work and purged enough of the trauma out of my nervous system, out of my body began to feel safe in regulation. My body began to feel safe in ease and peace. And it's one of the reasons why all of the other times that I'd given up caffeine, it didn't stick because my nervous system wasn't actually comfortable there. And so if I gave it up for a month or 2 months or 6 months, I would go right back. And I would go back hard. I would drink all the caffeine. And eventually, I learned how to find ease, how to find peace, how to find regulation. And then my desire for caffeine went away. And I stopped drinking it. And the other day, when I had a little caffeine, the thing that was so agitating to me, that I became so aware of so quickly, is that I was stuck in activation. You see, when you learn to regulate your nervous system, one of the things that happens is that you get a little bit of activation and you come back down, right? And you may do that 1,000 times a day. A friend calls you and you get excited, or your child shows you something and you get excited. You see the most beautiful sunrise and you get a little excited, and then you come back down. You should be able to get activated and come back down. Activated and come back down. But when I was running an anxiety pattern in my nervous system, I was just activated constantly activated. There was no coming down. And if I'm being really honest, sometimes I would use alcohol as a tool to come back down when I was stuck in too much activation. It was a really vicious cycle. So the other day, when I had a little bit of caffeine and I couldn't come back down, I couldn't come back into regulation, I got so agitated. My nervous system wanted to come back into regulation, but I couldn't because I'd had caffeine. And so I had to wait out the caffeine. And the lesson that I learned about the growth that I had been through, the healing that I'd been through, and what a difference there was for me in my reality, in my nervous system, in my body, in my mind, was enormous. And that perspective, that mindset where I could actually see just how regulated my nervous system has become, was such a gift. To be able to witness myself in that growth, in that healing, in that regulation. And I wanted to share this because it wasn't until I was sitting in silence and reflecting about why I was so activated that day that I began to really see that I had used caffeine as a tool to support the anxiety pattern that I run or used to run in my nervous system. And that when I got regulated, when I had done enough healing, that my nervous system was comfortable in regulation, it became really easy to give up caffeine. And then with the introduction of even a tiny bit of caffeine, my nervous system was so agitated because it couldn't come back down. I should be able to get activated and come back down, get activated and come back down. It should happen thousands of times a day. But I was just stuck in activation. And my nervous system went crazy about it. And I got this really beautiful perspective about just how painful it had been to live in a constant state of activation. And there were times that if someone had asked me, do you have anxiety? I would have told you no. And the reality is that I've been running an anxiety pattern of my nervous system for as long as I can remember. At some point in childhood. But the way that I displayed my anxiety pattern was being an overproducer, was constantly being on, was constantly striving to be the best, was loving the stimulation. If you'd met me years ago, maybe you have, maybe you haven't, you know that there was an intensity to me. I was on all the time. I loved stimulation. I loved it. And now, I love peace. I love ease. I love calmness. I love stillness. And what that shift has created inside of me and inside of my life has been enormous. Enormous. And it truly wasn't until I understood my nervous system and how to work with it rather than working against it, and how to deeply sink into somatic healing, that regulation happened inside of my nervous system, that actual, real, tangible, touchable healing happened for me. And that is not to minimize or discount the healing that I did before I leaned into somatics, because that was very real, but it was very cognitive. It was very cerebral. It was very mind-based. And when I realized that I could do that healing in a mind-based place and a nervous system body-based place, that is when it stuck. That is when the shift really happened. That is when I became a different person. This is the thing. I like this person so much better. There is a calmness to me that I didn't think was possible. I would have told you that I'm just somebody who's on a lot. That was just a trauma response. And I'm so grateful to not be on all the time. And I think back about what it was like to live in a state of anxiety constantly. And there are moments where I feel sad for that version of me, but mostly, I feel grateful for this version of me. I feel grateful to know that life doesn't have to be like that. I didn't even know I was that uncomfortable until I wasn't living it. I mean, there were aspects that I knew were uncomfortable, but I had no idea. I didn't have the perspective. And this experience of having a little bit of caffeine and getting to see what it felt like to just be stuck in activation made me so grateful that I leaned in so intensely to somatic healing and regulating my nervous system. It was literally life-changing. It has created a scenario for me where I don't chase. I don't run everywhere. I don't need to be doing constantly. And that ease, that peace in my life, I'm so grateful for it. It's delicious. And I wanted to share this experience with you because I think it's an important one. And I think it's something that we don't talk about a lot, the combination of trauma and caffeine and how those two things play together. I had so much trauma stuck in my body and in my nervous system that it didn't feel good being in a state of ease or peace. It didn't feel good to be in a state of regulation. And caffeine was one of the ways that I kept myself activated. And when I did enough healing inside of my body, inside of my nervous system, inside of my soul, I didn't have the need for the caffeine anymore. And I won't promise that I'll never take another sip of caffeine. I'm sure that someday I will. But I'm going to do it from a very conscious place, recognizing that it is going to get me into a state of activation that I will not be able to come down from quickly. And so that'll be a conscious choice that I get to make for myself, or not. And right now, I'm picking not. I hope that you are having a beautiful morning, day, evening, or night, wherever it is that this podcast is finding you.